down. Are they doing this? Are they pushing this down right now because they know that something big is on its way and they're trying to keep people out of the precious metals market for maybe the last time here?
Well, yeah, there is something on fire. You can't even say it's behind the scenes. The emerging markets are on fire. I mean, if you look at their credit markets, you look at their currencies, they're imploding all over the world. Interesting, this last smash down in gold and silver has done what it's done before. If you go back to 2008, 2009, I think if you go to 2013, as of yesterday, due to all the supposed selling that pushes the gold and silver prices down, the U.S. Mint suspended deliveries because of too much demand.
So why is this important? Why are you bringing this up?
Because if there's too much demand to the U.S. Mint, that tells you that there's absolute real demand for real metal. And that's been brought about by the price being pushed down too far by paper traders. And it's been my contention for years that when all is said and done, you're going to see the COMEX paper futures go one direction and real metal go the other direction. At some point in time, you're going to see that COMEX futures and paper gold, paper silver are contracts that cannot perform, and the value of a contract that cannot perform is zero. And that's where paper gold and silver are going to go. At the same time, real physical gold and silver will be unattainable. So they're going to blast off in opposite directions.
Now, with the silver market, I mean, are they stopping the selling of the silver coins because they don't have enough silver right now? Or are they doing for another?
All I know is what I read. It was a note from the U.S. Mint. They just said that there's too much demand. So whether they don't have enough silver or, they've depleted whatever stockpiles they had ready for delivery, there is an interruption in deliveries.
Now,
but think about it, Dave. It makes zero sense that if the price of silver got smashed, that would be due to selling. And if you look at COMEX futures, and if you look at the amount of EFPs that have been shipped off to London in exchange for physicals, the open interest is at an all-time high. And the exchange for physicals so far this year is 2 billion ounces. There is not 2 billion ounces anywhere on the planet, probably in the history, in all of history, including the Manhattan Project, that could be delivered. So it's a paper game. It's a fraud. It's an outright fraud.
Now, JP Morgan, they've been accumulating a huge amount of silver in their COMEX warehouse, and it's reported that they have more than the 1980 Hunt Brothers and 1998 Berkshire Hathaway, more than they both did at those times. What's their reasoning for accumulating so much silver right now?
They purportedly have something like 700 million ounces. And the real question is, whose silver is it? Is it JP Morgan's? Is it the U.S. Treasuries? Is it China's? Who knows? If you can tell me whose silver it is, then I can try to deduce, why the strategy of amassing that amount. Obviously, somebody's amassed it because they understand that that real silver above ground is scarce.
What's going to be more important when everything implodes? Is it going to be gold or silver? I mean, for people that are thinking like, "Ooh, I should buy gold or silver," what do you think is more important to hold on to here, silver or gold?
Silver, the silver to gold ratio now is just a tad over 80-1. It's historically been 15-1, and it comes out of the ground at 10-1. So silver is, if gold is cheap, silver is super, super cheap. So I think from a performance standpoint, I could see that ratio coming back to somewhere between 10 and 20-1, which means silver will outperform gold at least fourfold. The other thing is, when the system does come down, there's only so many wealthy people that'll have the ability to gobble up gold. And there's billions of lesser wealthy people that will gobble up silver. In other words, silver is going to be poor man's gold. So I think you're just going to see an overwhelming demand from the little guy into the silver markets.
I wanted to switch into the economy right now, and Trump is out there telling us that the GDP numbers are fantastic, unemployment is low. People are confused right now because from 2008, when we had the Great Recession going to 2009, we talked about the manipulation in GDP, unemployment, and everything else. And now all of a sudden, the economy is doing well. I mean, a lot of people are sitting there going, well, this doesn't make sense because one minute it wasn't doing well. The next minute it is doing well. And we know that these numbers are still manipulated. Is there a plan here? What is his plan?
We're watching the trade numbers, and the trade numbers are getting worse. And the reason for that is a stronger dollar. And I've said now for a year anyway, the last year, after about the first 6 months of Trump's term, he started taking ownership of the stock market. And I have been saying all along that I think that's a big mistake for him to own the stock market. I believe that, and you know I'm on the record for saying I think truth bombs are going to matter. I believe that some truth is going to come out and all hell is going to break loose in markets. And I think Trump will be able to point at, well, hey, everything was doing fine, but, this news came out and it is what it is, and we're going to have to deal with it. And
what do you think this news is going to be? I mean, you pointing to something specific or?
Yeah, like we were talking about before the call. I mean, all these sealed indictments that are backlogged. I truly believe you're going to see military tribunals, and actually his executive order back in January talks about the military code. So I think you're going to see some treason, some traitor, sedition cases. I think there's going to be a huge explosion of pedophilia exposed cases, and also this Russia thing is falling completely apart. And even by this weekend, if he declassifies the 20 FISA warrants, then we find out who signed them. And that whole thing is starting to fall apart. I mean, now Judicial Watch has found out that Peter Strzok was the one who wrote Comey's first draft. I mean, we're getting closer and closer to the core. And I can't point and say it's going to be this or it's going to be that, but it's going to be the dirt.
So if this news, like you said, comes out, how do you think this is going to affect the economy? Do you think the market's going to fall? Do you think we're going to see riots? Do you think people are just going to reject it and say it's not real?
I think you're going to see all of the above. I think you'll see some on the left just reject it and call it fake news. I think there will be riots, and I also believe that confidence will completely break in the system. And that will go hand in hand, by the way, with the fractional reserve nature of the gold and silver markets. There's going to be a cash call in those markets, and that those markets will be exposed that the metal does not exist to deliver. And that will spread and expose the rest of the fractional reserve nature of our entire financial system. So confidence is going to break. That's the bottom line. And I think Trump is going to be able to point at, hey, I didn't do these things. They happened. And everything was fine. Everything was going along fine until confidence broke, and he'll point at what broke confidence.
So do you think this is going to be the trigger for the economy collapsing finally?
That could be a trigger. It also, you could see some of these emerging markets trigger it. I mean, the emerging markets, this is very similar to what happened back in 2008 with the credit. Supposedly, there was going to be no contagion. It was all contained. And they're saying, no, there won't be any contagion. I have, let me relate this to you. Some boots on the ground reconnaissance. I had an exchange student from Brazil live with me, back in the early 1990s for about a year. And I've kept in touch with him over the years. And I spoke to him, 2 days ago, and we generally don't talk business. He's from a very wealthy family. And I specifically wanted to ask him what the conditions were or are in Brazil. And he flat out told me, he said, "Oh, Bill, I've never seen things as bad as they are right now. And I asked him about interest rates. He told me that interest rates in Brazil right now for a collateralized loan, in other words, with a piece of property or something or a business behind the loan, the interest rate is 20%. And I was shocked. And he said, but that's not the worst of it. He said an uncollateralized loan is 100%. Now, what that tells me is that economy is dead. It cannot function. No economy can function with 20% rates, much less 100% rates. So, and that's just Brazil. Then you've got, you've got all the rest. You've got Argentina, you've got Turkey, you've got South Africa. I mean, there's a whole long list of them, and all of those countries have borrowed in terms of dollars. And that's the problem, is that they can't print dollars to pay back the debt. So these are going to be defaulted loans.
So we're seeing the emerging markets right now where they're seeing inflation. They're seeing interest rates. Hyperinflation. And now if they start defaulting, what then happens?
Well, I mean, then you're talking about the banking system, because one person's debt is another person's asset. And in these cases, you're looking at banks all around the world have lent dollars to these countries. And interesting, as of today, emerging market stock markets as a whole have entered a bear market in their own currencies.
So let me just go back to the news about the Pfizer warrants and stuff like that. Now, when the rest of the world hears about this and hears, the corruption and what's going on here, will other countries look at this and start to lose faith in the U.S., in the U.S.'s economic system, the Fed, and everything else that's here?
Exactly. I mean, think about it. If you're a foreigner and you have capital in the United States and you find out proof positive how dirty the United States has been, what are you going to do with your capital? You're going to move it somewhere else.
So if capital is pulled out of the U.S., this will just make matters worse then?
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's when capital gets withdrawn from a country, the currency drops, the bond market drops, which means interest rates go up, and the overall bid to that system evaporates. So what you've got is sellers of dollars and dollar denominated assets that were not, they sat in dollar denominated assets for years and years, but now they will become sellers. And who's going to buy? And the answer to that is the Federal Reserve. The Fed is going to be the lender, the buyer, the bid of last and only resort.
I mean, and on top of this, Trump has been criticizing the Fed where, he came out and said, hey, listen, we shouldn't be raising rates right now. Debt's coming due soon. But he made a remark in his quote saying that, all right, but the Fed knows what's best for the country. So go ahead and do what you got to do. Do you think he's actually really saying that this is not good for the country? This is going to bring down the system and the Fed will be responsible for that?
I think that Donald Trump is a lot smarter than many people give him credit for. I believe he fully understands the system's going to come down and he's going to preside over the bankruptcy of the United States. And the only question is, what form or manner does the system come down and how is the bankruptcy handled?
Do you think this was all planned from the start?
You could say it was planned all the way back to prior to just 1913, prior to the beginning of the Fed. I mean, it's a predictable end. It's an absolutely predictable end. You can't know when, but you can know that eventually the amount of interest that's required to pay can't be paid. And that's where we are.
Well, do you think that what Trump is doing right now, do you think this is a planned takedown of the system? And he knows that if, he declassifies the IG report or declassifies the FISA pages, he knows that it's going to cause problems in the U.S. Do you think this was planned from the beginning to maybe reset the entire system and put those in prison who committed treason? Do you think this was all planned from, many years ago where they finally got him into office and to push this forward?
I don't know if he was planned to be put into office many years ago, but yeah, it is planned. I mean, this is a fight of light versus dark. And if Trump had lost, if Hillary had won, what kind of world would we be living in right now? none of these truths would be coming out. I mean, none of it would have come out. None. The pedophilia would not be being prosecuted. We would never have found out anything that was going on in the Department of Justice, the FBI, and now we're getting pretty close to some very real and ugly core truths. So, I mean, we wouldn't have gotten here. And I do want to say, now that we're on the second Supreme Court nomination by Trump, I said last year that him nominating and getting Gorsuch as a conservative on the Supreme Court, really that was my only hope during that election, was that Trump would win, so that, because Scalia was already dead. It was an 8-8 Supreme Court, and whoever won the presidency was going to tip the Supreme Court one way or the other. So now he's on his second pick. And at the time, a year ago, I made the comment that, that's all I could have hoped for during the 2016 election. And now it looks like, it really looks like the war between light and truth, or light and darkness. And it looks like the truth is starting to be extracted, and darkness is going to lose.
So when all this news comes out, how do you think the American people are going to handle this? Do you think we would actually enter into some type of civil war or something like that?
Yeah, I think it will become complete pandemonium, every man for himself. I think the financial system is going to break down from a mathematical standpoint. That's the first thing. And then from a social standpoint and a divisiveness standpoint, look at where this country is now versus where it was, say, 20 years ago. You have the racial divisions, you have religious divisions, you have, they want to say that there's 23 different sex genders. We're living in a crazy world where the right believes they're correct, the left believes they're correct, and hard and fast, there's no changing any minds. And on top of that, when the financial system comes down, how do you think people are going to react when they're hungry? They're pissed off already. So if somebody's pissed off to begin with and then you make them hungry, what are you going to have?
Is there anything that the Fed or Trump can do to maybe reboot the system? Is it possible?
No, I don't. In my opinion, no. Go back to what we were just talking about. From a mathematical standpoint, it's not rebootable. They rebooted it back in 2008, 2009. And they did that by completely blowing up central bank and sovereign treasury balance sheets. There's no one out there that can step up and reflate the system. So all they can do is monetize, which creates hyperinflation. And if hyperinflation was great, then, Venezuela, Zimbabwe, et cetera, would be great places to live. They're not. And then you add on top of that the fact that not just this nation, but the world is so divided. When the financial system comes down and credit breaks, distribution will break down. I've talked about that many times. When distribution breaks down, goods are not going to make it to stores. And the old saying, you wake up every morning and you're only 72 hours away from complete anarchy. That's 3 days of not having meals.
How does Trump, the administration, or if the Fed is still there, how do they reset the system? Is it just going to, they're going to say, okay, we got to do away with what we have now and we have to bring a new system online? What do they do at this point?
In order to create a new system, you got to you got to let the old system fail. And the next banking system, whatever it will be, I firmly believe will have currencies that are backed, not convertible, but backed on a ratio basis by both gold and silver. And if you look at what Russia and China and a lot of other countries in the world are doing, they are accumulating gold. And that tells me that the next banking system is basically going to be, it'll be like a ballroom where countries enter, and the lady with the biggest gold necklace is going to be the most respected.
So you don't think that the IMF is going to use the SDR to be like the next reserve currency?
I think they're going to try. I believe there's going to be two resets. The first one's going to fail. And the first reset more than likely will be the SDR. But what is the SDR? It's a basket of fiat currencies. So, I mean, that's like one drunk trying to hold up another drunk.
So, I mean, since China and Russia have a lot of the gold, has Trump tried to get any gold back, or do we have any gold?
I can't answer the first question. I don't know. The second question is from all the evidence I've seen, it looks like the U.S. has over many, many years bled dry our vaults. And if there is any gold left in Fort Knox, West Point, etc., it's probably encumbered. In other words, it's lent out.
Now, if that's the case, what happens when we try to reset the system? If you're saying we're going to be on like a gold back type of system and the U.S. has very little or no gold whatsoever and it's lent out, and China and Russia have all the gold, what is the U.S., what do we do at that point?
We got a big problem, don't we? Now, there are a couple of options. You could see a confiscation. In the event of a confiscation, I would much prefer to have U.S. mint coins as opposed to bars or foreign coins. If there's a confiscation, I would think bars and foreign coins would be confiscated first. The other thing is you could see a national campaign. They might call it Dig Baby Dig. In other words, start digging up the gold and silver reserves in the United States that would have to be sold to the Treasury at some market price, but it could become a national campaign to fill up, to catch up to the rest of the world. Remember, we're supposed to be the largest holder of gold in the world. And it's very possible or highly probable we have less than 1,000 tons.
So if we have less than 1,000 tons, and people we're all worried that, we've been purchasing gold or silver. People have been doing this. Not everyone in the country, but many people have. People have always been worried that, I'm afraid that they're going to confiscate my gold. If people sit there and they say, I'm not handing this over, what happens then?
If it got to that, I mean, you could possibly see an attempt at going door to door, but there'd be massive amount of deaths every single day. Generally people who own silver and gold also own lead. So I think, right there, you asked, will there be a civil war? Right there is reason for massive uprising.
Let's continue on this. If the U.S. has no gold and they're going to have to dig, like you said, and China and Russia, they have most of the gold because they've been purchasing for quite a while now. Are they the new powerhouse of the world now? Or are they the reserve currency? Is that where the manufacturing is? Are they the U.S. back in the 40s?
You just answered your own question.
So yes,
they have the money. They have the manufacturing. They have if you want to call it a hungry population. Not from a food standpoint, but from the standpoint of, they're working, they're earning, they want to better themselves. It's like the U.S. was, like you just said, 75, 100 years ago.
So the U.S. right now what has it become? An empty shell?
The U.S. has become Britain after World War I and World War II. Britain was the previous power. They lost power and, have basically just treaded water and are no longer a world power. The difference is the U.S. from a military standpoint, the U.S. does have obviously, a military that could end the world. So, I mean, that's obviously a danger, is seeing the table get kicked over. If we can't run the show, there's no show.
Do you think the deep state, when all this information starts to come out about the 20-page FISA, maybe the Inspector General report, when it starts to get all declassified, do you think the deep state will try some type of an event or maybe try to start a war?
Yeah, I would definitely keep my eyes open for what very well could be a false flag.
And what scale do you think this will be on? Do you think it's going to be like another type of shooting, or do you think it's going to be something on the scale of 9/11?
Yeah, this is pretty much for all the marbles. I mean, we're getting down to some very core truths. And if the core truths get exposed, you're going to see, the left completely lose power. And I don't think they're going to give that up willingly. So your imagination is as good as mine as to what or how grand a false flag could be.
So are you thinking that this is going to happen, like we've been talking about, between now and the election time? You think that's the time frame where we think that this is going to happen?
That would be most likely. Well, Dave, I mean, if the news from Sarah Carter today is that by the weekend, and the weekend is just a couple days away, or by the end of the week is what she put it, he may release that. If this gets released, it pretty much is a domino, and it'll set things in motion. So to answer your question, yeah, I think the most likely time is between now and the election.
So all the things that we talked about in the past with the economy, with your pensions, your savings, dollars that you have in the bank, dollars that you have, maybe hidden at home, things like land and the stock market, is that just going to disappear? Is it going to drop down to zero?
Obviously, land doesn't disappear and doesn't drop to zero. Stocks won't go to zero. They'll probably take a pretty big hit. I do think that when I say a pretty big hit, I mean, a 50% drop in the stock market would leave the markets still overvalued at this point. I think you're going to see the dollar get smashed versus international currencies and completely collapse versus silver and gold. And I also think you're going to see interest rates break free from the Fed and trade at much higher levels in order to attract capital to the United States.
And you think this is when all the manipulation comes to an end, like with gold and silver?
Right. Markets will overpower the derivatives that are being used by the ESF, the plunge protection team, etc.
And the value of gold and silver, where do you think, I mean, I don't need an exact amount, but where do you think this is going to go? Because right now, what is silver, like 14, 15, and gold is around 1,200. Is it going to go up a lot, or?
Dave, I did a mathematical equation. If you took the 21 trillion that the U.S. owes and divided that by the amount of gold that we supposedly have, and that's a big assumption because, like we were just talking about, I don't think the gold's there. But assuming it is there, you come up to a number of $87,000 per ounce. And that's just to cover the 21 trillion of debt. That does not cover any future promises, pensions, Ginnie Mae, Fannie Mae, Social Security, et cetera, et cetera.
And what about silver?
If you had an $87,000 price on gold and the ratio was 15 or 20 to 1, you do the math.
That's quite a bit. It's a lot more than $14 or $15.
It's in the thousands.
Yeah. For right now, I mean, everything that we've been talking about, and we've been talking about this for quite a while. I interviewed you many, many times. I mean, we're coming down to...
It's coming to a head, Dave.
Yeah, it's all coming to a head, and we're going to be seeing this happen very, very soon.
I think so.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for being on the X22 Report Spotlight. Once again, how can people see your work?
You can go to www.jsmindset.com.
And I just wanted to let everyone know that I'm going to be on Bill and Jim's YouTube channel. We're going to be recording next Wednesday at 4:30. Is that live or is that a recording?
No, we're going to record it. We'll do it as a YouTube, or we end up doing it as a Vimeo if YouTube takes us down again. Yeah, and this will be, we plan to interview you, Dave, Greg Hunter, Sean from SGT, and also Dr. Dave Janda. Basically, the topic is going to be censorship. And I mean, who else better to ask than you guys? Because, you've been censored, taken down, put back up, threatened, you name it. So,
right.
And anything and no holds barred, basically.
Bill, once again, thank you very much for being on the Spotlight. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.